Welcome back to another episode of The Top Step. My name is Rowland-Smith. Now in this episode, I am joined by 6-time Ultimate Fighting Champion and MMA legend, Mr. Randy Couture. Now I started this podcast and called it The Top Step because some of my favorite memories in the big leagues was standing on the top step of the dugout with teammates hearing their story and being inspired by their journey. Now before all the world titles of the toughest sport on the planet, Randy was a college dropout with a kid on the way. Collegiate wrestling was an afterthought. MMA didn't even exist at this point. And the only option for him to support his family was to join the army because they were offering $5,000 to anyone who would enlist. Now fast forward to the most successful career in the UFC, as well as starring alongside Hollywood action royalty in The Expendables. I couldn't wait to dive into the mind of a world-class MMA fighter who has overcome so much. What's it like to stand 10 feet away and go head-to-head with some of the scariest dudes in the world? As well as find out what happens the minutes after 280-pound Brock Lessner gives you multiple hammer fists to the face. Now, if you're enjoying these episodes, these journeys from the best athletes in the world, be sure to press the subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast. Or go to www.thetopstep.com so you don't miss future episodes. Or if you haven't already, you can go check out this episode on YouTube. There's a link below in the notes. So sit back, relax. I hope you enjoy this episode as Randy Couture joins me on The Top Step.
No matter what happens, Rowland-Smith has something to tell his grandkids right here. First appearance of the big leagues. Face a Hall of Famer. Especially if he strikes them out.
Here comes the 1-2 pitch to Junior now. The breaking ball. He struck him out. Yeah, that will be a story for the rest of his life as he strikes out Ken Griffey Jr. and the inning is over. But what an inning it was at 6.
How we doing, buddy? First, I got to ask you, I know you're in Vegas at the moment. Now, you were born in the Northwest, born in Seattle, right? Yep. Spent plenty of time there. Were you ever, and you can be honest, were you ever a Mariners fan?
Yeah, I like the Mariners. I mean, they were the only team we ever had. So, right. You know, we didn't have a football team forever, too. So I liked the Broncos till Seattle got their own team with the Seahawks. So, you know, I liked baseball as a kid. My mom always said that was the sport I should have played. And I ended up on a wrestling mat. Go figure.
Right, and that was in high school, right? And that's the one thing I wanted to ask you about that as well. When you were in high school, you know, you dealt with, I think you got beat up or something like that, and you're in a situation where your mum, and correct me if I'm wrong here, your mum said no to a boxing gym?
Yeah, that's true. It was 7th grade. We were getting picked on like most kids. Yeah. The new kids rolling into junior high school. My buddy Bobby Stevenson and a couple of us were getting picked on. You know, I had started wrestling that year. That was my first year of wrestling.
Right.
With Coach K. Spear at Alderwood Junior High School. And this kid, Romberg, kept picking on us. He dumped Bobby in the trash can. He'd try and cram us in lockers. You know, just stupid stuff that kids do. And
the typical stuff, yeah.
I kind of got tired of it, and he approached me at lunchtime trying to pick on me, and I double-legged him and put him on the asphalt and
I like it.
Smacked him a few times, and lo and behold, I never got another fight after that. It seemed to work. Nobody bothered me, so
right.
I don't know.
Have you? I mean, you know, has this guy ever approached you in the last 20 years and said, "Hey, man, I used to kick your ass, and then finally you took me down"?
No, I've never seen the guy again. It's funny, one of the guys I used to, me and my friend Mark Baggerly, we grew after high school. Right. You know, I was 168 pounds. He was 158 pounds our senior year in high school. And Mark was one of those guys that got picked on too. Both of us were late bloomers. We grew later. Mark shot up after our senior year to 6'2". I mean, he's a huge guy. And he ran into Romberg in a Jack in the Box that summer after we graduated, after he had grown, and it wasn't very pretty. Romberg was one of those guys that had a beard back then in junior high. No, he didn't change. He didn't grow anymore. he was the same guy, and here Mark had really grown, and so
it's amazing, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
that happens all the time. The kids with the beards, in junior high, all of a sudden everyone grows up, and then they're going to start watching their back. So you said, you weren't getting in fights. This wasn't a background where you're just getting in fights as a kid.
No, never. I was in that fight and maybe two others, all through school. One of those was at another high school at a summer dance. The other one was a kid that I had sometime in my 7th grade year, I broke my shoulder riding motorcycles. And so I was in a sling with a screw sticking out. And that was the opportunity this kid took to kind of start harassing me on the bus and harassing me in class. And, I kind of exploded on him in the middle of English class, where he, continued harassing me. And even with one arm and a sling, I cracked him a couple times. I kind of got suspended for 3 days, but it was, again, never had any trouble with him again either. So
yeah, I remember. You never, because I remember when I was a kid in high school, you get bullied like you did back then. I guess it's different now. They do it all online now, but back then I'd get bullied. I'd get the threats and everything else. But I was always too just scared shitless to be around. So I'm always wondering when you see guys like you, like, oh man, they must have kicked some ass back in the day. But I guess not. I guess it's different. It's a separator. So
that's you bring up an interesting point, and I think that's the difference between when we grew up and what's going on now, and the bullying that's going on now. Once I went home and got off the bus and went to my house or whatever, I'm with my friends, I'm with my family. The bullying stopped, and I didn't have to think about it or deal with it until the next day at school. Now there's no escape from it. 24/7 social media platforms, kids are hammering, and everybody's seeing it. It's not like one or two friends are there and see it. Everybody that's your friend at school follows you and is on that platform and sees what's going on.
Oh, dude, the
problem.
It's crazy. The pressure to try and keep up with what's going on and the posting the right things. Do you have that at your gym at Extreme Couture? Do you have, kids rolling in, I don't know, whatever age, who have been bullied and they're all of a sudden like, hey, I want to learn how to defend myself?
We do. We absolutely do. And we spent some special, some extra time. We've taught some women's self-defense courses. Our kids programs are the fastest growing part of our gym. I have some great fighters and instructors that teach and not only teach the technique and the tactics, but the responsibility that comes with those techniques and tactics.
What are the best techniques? I know I'm sort of going down a different road to what I want to jump off with this interview, but what are the tactics on the street? Obviously, it's different to inside an octagon. What's the best form you would teach someone, like a woman's self-defense? What would be the best way to teach, or the best style?
Yeah, well, I don't think there is one style that encompasses everything you need to know. As a female, the first and foremost, be aware. Be aware of your exits. Have your keys ready when you walk to your car. Know exactly where you're going. Show some confidence. Walk with a demeanor that says you're nobody to be messed with. People tend to prey on the weak. They tend to prey on the meek and the mild. And unfortunately, that's the truth, and that's how it works. So just in your demeanor and how you respond and being prepared so that you're not hung up looking for your keys in your purse, or you don't have that mace, or if you're smart enough and wise enough to go out and get a gun, learn to shoot it, get your concealed carry permit. Those are all things that I think are important as women, because 9 times out of 10 in any kind of physical altercation, you're going to be overpowered. Most men are just physically bigger and stronger than females. So the reality of that, that's just how it is, unfortunately. So then, if it gets past being prepared and having some sort of way to defend yourself with mace, a big stick, the appropriate firearm, and knowing how to, and again, responsibility that comes with those things. I think jiu-jitsu is certainly a great place to start. Brazilian style jiu-jitsu was designed for the smaller opponent. Helio Gracie was a smaller man. He was competing against guys that were much bigger than him. And that's where Brazilian style jiu-jitsu was born, out of that guy who was continually being taken down and having to operate from the bottom, from a position that most people see as a disadvantage, and finding ways to get your large muscle groups, your legs, into the fight and make them effective, and render your opponent unconscious and change positions. All those things come through that Brazilian. So I think that it's a great style for women. My daughter did that from the time she was 14. Obviously women's fighting has become very, very popular. Right. So finding a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school is not hard. There's one in just about every city out there now. So, and I think that's a great place to start. I think it's silly to assume that you're going to be able to strike or throw a punch or throw a kick to somebody who's trying to attack you. It's going to be very difficult as the smaller opponent. Now, start with jiu-jitsu and develop some basic skills there to protect yourself, especially on the bottom. And then you can learn to punch and kick and be effective. I mean, we've seen some female fighters that guys picked the wrong chick to mess with and got their butts handed to them. So it can be very effective, but you got to have some place to start. And I think BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is the place. You
mentioned Jiu-Jitsu, and even in the early days, like UFC 1, that was basically the game changer, wasn't it? I mean, you see those early clips, of Gracie, taking guys down, and they just, you had strikers. What was the guy's name? Art, with the one glove, the one boxing glove.
Art was a very, very high level boxer.
Right. And he had no chance because it was just flat out take him to the ground and you got no chance, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a perfect example of why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a great place to start. And certainly I would say wrestling, if you're interested in wrestling, that was my background. Yeah. That's a full medal sport for women now, and national and collegiate programs across the country now. I think 33 national wrestling programs at the collegiate level for women now. There are several states that are opening women's individual state championships for wrestling. So wrestling's certainly great. But again, I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is designed for that person that's not as big as their opponent. And Royce Gracie, in many ways, him and his family revolutionized martial arts and our view of what effective martial arts is.
Right, I'm jumping ahead here because I want to talk about your early days in UFC. But is that with jiu-jitsu? Did you look at when you wanted to break into mixed martial arts? Did you look at that and say, "Okay, I got a wrestling background. I know how to grapple. I know how to fight on the ground. But man, I got to pick up my game here with the jiu-jitsu because that's really the base of how guys are winning."
Absolutely, that's the first thing I picked up and started trying to train in. As a wrestler, I was not used to being on my back. Was not used to have a little bit different kind of path of least resistance mentality, if you will. Where wrestling is, no, I'm going to make a door here. I'm going to make something happen. It's a lot more aggressive attitude in wrestling than there is in jiu-jitsu. But it was one of the first things I knew I had to learn. I saw guys like Royce choking guys out, catching them in triangles, catching them in arm bars. From their back, and that's a place I was not used to being or experiencing. So absolutely spent 14 years training in that, and eventually got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu myself. So definitely someplace to go.
Yeah, and now going back to, we're talking about, with kids, and, I initially thought that you got into wrestling, because you got your ass kicked a little bit, got bullied, whatever. Like a lot of kids get into any kind of combat sport, whether it be karate for a 10-year-old or whatever. Yeah. But for you, I mean, and this is something that you've spoken about, the coach you had in high school, and you probably remember this because I always feel like there's a moments or people you run into change, obviously the whole course of your life. He filled that void for you because your dad wasn't around. Right. And he was that figure that came in and helped you out and just kind of gave you some sort of guidance.
That's true. Coach K. Spear was my junior high school coach. Coach McAvoy was my high school coach. And those guys filled that void. They're the ones that gave me a kick in the ass when I needed a kick in the ass. They're also the ones that threw their arm around me and said, "Hey, it's not that bad. You're going to be all right." Right. When I needed that, because my dad was never around.
Yeah. And I always, I think of this, and I was preparing to sit down and talk to you, but there's always that thing. I sort of battled with this because I got a chance to play in the big leagues around the time you and I met in LA. I was training. I was doing you had the MMA athletics for athletes, for baseball players, football players, and it was around that time where I really started to struggle in my career. And I always think back, and I was looking at your story. You had adversity, and you had or some kind of trauma that you dealt with, and even later on, even in your 20s. And I always thought back as like, did I have enough? Because when you look at these elite athletes or extremely successful people, you always look at it and say, you have to have something like that go on in your life to have success. I know it's not always that way, but I'm trying to, I'm working with kids now who are trying to get to play professional baseball at college level. And there's always got to be that driving factor. You know what I mean? Do you agree with that? I mean,
I think I do agree with that in some ways. I don't think having some sort of abuse or adversity that you had to face is a prerequisite to success. Yeah. But I think those things make us tougher, better humans. And I look at my nephew, who was a very good ball player and a state champ in the state of Washington his senior year. He grew up with hemophilia. Right. He had to learn by the time he was 5 to give himself factor 8 injections. And I mean, what 5-year-old that kind of adversity made him very, very mentally tough. Yeah. And I think led to him being as good a ball player as he was. Now, he was also very smart. He decided to go on and work in the financial world instead of going on and trying to pursue pro ball. But, I still see kids like that who have to overcome adversity like that. They're more resilient. They're going to take a shot or take a setback or something like that a lot more in stride than the kid that's had stuff handed to him the whole way down the road.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's kind of my point too. I mean, I see it, from whether they're teenagers or even, and again, I got to a point in my career, I was like, man, have I gone through enough here to really respect and appreciate how hard this is and to, to start pushing myself even more, even later on in my career, because I was at a point too, 2010, I scuffled, man. It was a terrible year. I think what the program that you and Jay Glazer at the time had, just more of the mental thing. There was no baseball involved. It was just me in the gym figuring out what that 1% of the population's ever endured, inside like the stuff you've done. And it just switched me on. It just helped me to say, okay, I'm manufacturing some of this adversity to try and push myself to that next level. You know what I mean? So, it's, and I think too, and, looking through your career as well, you got to a point where you dropped out of school, you just had a newborn, and you were basically, if you can go back to right before the Army were basically giving, a $5,000 signing bonus, right? And that was basically your thing. You're like, okay, not out of, you didn't have any other option really. You're looking at this going, okay, man, I'll do it. Because at that point, your wrestling career, MMA career, anything was just basically stone cold, right?
Yeah, it was toast. There was no way I was going to afford to stay in college or go to college with a new family on the way. And the only way I could support that family, and I think largely because of the adversity I faced not having a dad around, I wasn't going to be that guy. I was going to be in this kid's life from start to finish. Right. And was not going to be like my dad. So the Army was a viable way for me to support that new family. My daughter was born while we were stationed in Germany 2 years later. And lo and behold, things worked out. I ended up in Germany. I ended up wrestling again and getting a shot to represent the Army wrestling and off and running and back in the Olympic race and trying to make the Olympic team and all that, which I thought all of that was gone. And those were the right decisions to make. Fate had a different plan for me. I ended up where I needed to be to continue on the road I was on.
Right. So going back to that point, and you got back. You're in the Army. You're part of the Army wrestling team, and got back into a situation where you could wrestle again. Was the end game for you the light at the end of the tunnel? You mentioned the Olympics. Was that just the straight? I'm going to go be an Olympian. Was that it for you? Was there any other career aspirations at that point?
No, I think originally when I thought wrestling was done and was joining the Army, I wanted to fly. I wanted to be a pilot. Right. And so that's one of the reasons why the military service and especially the Army was so appealing. and they were going to give me a $5,000 bonus to qualify as an air traffic controller, which was in aviation, which was one step closer to being a pilot.
Right.
And wrestling took off again. All of those ideas and kind of dreams took a backseat to going back out and trying to make that Olympic team. And ultimately in '88, I was an alternate as a soldier at that time. So,
because, I mean, 88, 92, around that time, wrestling, that's not, you're not going to make a career out of that in the sense of it's not going to support your family. If you're like, I went to the Olympics in 2004, and I was around a bunch of athletes that, they have to have a second job. I mean, they're trying to compete at the highest level, especially wrestling. I mean, and I'll admit this, and I played baseball at the Olympics, but is that the pinnacle? The Olympics was one of my favorite memories of all time. It was amazing. And coming from Australia, if you're an Olympian, that's the trump card. Everyone's like, oh my God, you're an Olympian. Doesn't matter what you did, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they look at that even
over Olympian in ballroom dancing, for crying out loud.
Exactly.
Impressive.
Exactly. But I think with wrestling, with that sport, it's so competitive, such a pinnacle. But on the flip side of that, I mean, you're in your late 20s. You've just gone through, you've been in the Army, you're in your late 20s. That's kind of at that point now. You're like, okay, where am I going in life? In a sense, it's not like you're a young 18-year-old and you're living at home and you go, oh, I'll just pursue wrestling and see what happens after that. And you know what I mean? So it's crazy when you think about that. I mean, because at that point, when you were 88, 92, the UFC or mixed martial arts, was that even in your mind at all?
No, it was not on the radar whatsoever. I didn't get introduced to the sport, and that was via a video until '96, and the sport started in the US in '93. And my first fight was in spring of '97. That was not something I set out to do. It was just one of those things that the door opened. I was coaching wrestling. That's how I was going to make a living and support the family. We're still chasing the Olympic dream, but also doing that by being the assistant wrestling coach at Oregon State, which was not a great paying job, but it was still a job with great benefits. And I was still on a wrestling mat every single day. So it was killing two birds with that one stone.
Yeah.
And then fighting came along. And that was a big decision. That was probably the two biggest decisions in my life. The first one was the decision to get out of the Army. I had 2 kids by then. I was supporting my family, still chasing that Olympic dream. And it was a big decision for me to get out of the Army and take that support and security away and go wrestle for 4 years at Oklahoma State and get my degree.
Yeah. That
was a huge decision. And then the other was to leave my coaching job and pursue fighting full time, 100%. And the head coach at the time kind of pushed me. He kicked me in the butt and said, "Hey, you're going to be one or the other. You can't be both." And I was kind of upset that he made me do that at the time. Yeah. But realized he was right. I would have tried to juggle both of those things, and one or both of them would have suffered.
So you're saying he pushed you not because he wanted you to stick around and coach. He wasn't like, "Oh, what are you doing? This is stupid, pursuing this. Stay here and coach." You're saying
it wasn't so much that he thought it was stupid. He thought it was bad for wrestling. He thought it was bad for the sport of wrestling.
Gotcha.
Even though there were other wrestlers that wrestled at the Olympic level that were doing it and getting paid very well, he thought it was a kind of a black eye for wrestling, and so he just didn't appreciate the sport.
Gotcha.
I felt differently. I thought it was a great venue for the wrestling to show what wrestling was all about and what it was capable of. And in some ways, in my opinion, the sport of MMA elevated wrestling to a martial arts status that it didn't have before.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
We disagreed on that. At the end of the day, he's the boss. He's the head coach. I'm the assistant coach.
Right.
I had to make a decision.
Yeah. So, I mean, and back then too, obviously publicly, the UFC isn't what it was now or not even close because, you mentioned your first fight. I mean, pretty much the year before that, John McCain came out and called it cockfighting and wanted to ban it across the US.
Yeah.
So you must be going into this thinking, oh, well, okay. Like, it's kind of like, doing something which no one approves of. You walk around the streets or your family saying, oh, hey, by the way, I want to be an MMA fighter. Like, you're out of your mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was that was, again, another layer of kind of being scared to make that commitment and make that decision. There's no guarantee you're going to win and stay in the sport. And then, there was a big backlash politically, McCain and others. And thank God they did that, because that forced us to run towards regulation in order to stay viable and stay on the books and keep putting on events. And and look where the sport has come because of that. Those changes were made, and the rules that are in place and all the things that we've done have come because of that scrutiny, because they kind of pushed us to regulate, to be considered a bona fide real sport. And I think we've come a long way because of that.
So it wasn't a situation where they're like, hey, just ban it, just flatten this thing. It was more of, hey, look, we are supporting you, just regulate it.
They were trying to ban it. They were trying very hard. And let's be honest, Senator McCain had very strong ties through Anheuser-Busch to boxing. And this sport was doing great numbers in pay-per-view. So they felt a little threatened by the potential of this new pay-per-view sport that was coming online. So that was his motivation for speaking out against the sport. It wasn't that he was that worried about my health and well-being. It was more that, he knew where his bread was buttered. And I think I'll be the first to admit that old version of the sport where there were very few rules and there weren't weight classes and it was hard to score and there were limited, the time limits were upwards of 20 plus minutes in 16-man tournaments where you're fighting 3 times in a night. It's a lot to ask of any athlete. And so I think running towards regulation was the right thing, both for the athletes that are involved and for the longevity of a bona fide sport.
So, okay, when you're walking into, especially those early days where they didn't have the regulation, the rules were slim. Now, I'm talking from the 99% of the population here, not like you. Obviously, you're different, but me and every other dude who sits on the couch and watches UFC says, I'll do this, I'll do that. I have no idea because they've never done it. There had to be that element of fear where you're walking in to, I even know, even if they had octagons back then, if it was octagons or what it was, they did.
They did.
There had to be that you walking in, not having a clue about your opponent or how they've prepared or what they're going to do, because back then the injuries that were possible, and it's still the same now, obviously, but back then nothing's regulated, right? So you might be walking in an absolute life-altering injury. So there had to be some sort of fear factor, especially the early days, right?
Well, I think one of the things that makes fighters really good at what they do is that they don't think like that.
Right.
They have an air of invincibility, if you will. Oh, it's never going to happen to me.
Right.
And that's what makes us good at what we do, because what we do, I mean, there's a lot of other sports out there too that are the same thing. Look at some of these bicyclists and motorcycle riders and skateboarders and some of the crazy stuff that they're doing. And they know inherently there's a risk they're going to get injured.
Yeah.
They're the same. I knew that walking in, but it didn't matter. I had a passion for this. It's what I love to do. I wasn't going to, football's the same way. Guys, that's a car wreck every Sunday.
Right.
Guys know the risks, especially now with CTE and everything else that we've learned.
Yeah.
That's opened up through science and athletics. So yes, inherently we all know that small risk, and we deal with that fear, that little bit of anxiety. But guess what? Anybody that says they don't have that anxiety is a sociopath. They're not telling you the truth.
Oh, I'm glad you can admit that.
That's what motivates you to do the work.
Yeah.
To make sure you're prepared. There's still no guarantee.
Yeah.
But you've at least prepared your body the best way you know how to go out there and be effective.
Yeah, see, I'm coming from a background that I can suck. And I've had plenty of times where it's been a freeze moment or, avoiding a pitch because I don't want to get, but I'm just saying your sport, if you have that freeze moment, you're looking at life-threatening injuries. You know what I mean? That's kind of the difference, So that's kind of the point I was making with that. It's just, man, because you just watch some of those clips of the early days, even when when Gracie was just kept choking because he wanted to make sure the referee could see. It's like the dude's about to pass out. He's seconds away from passing out. But it's funny because again, I'm in that the population of people who, watch the UFC. I'm a fan of it. It's a blast. It's a blast to watch. And you always, I'm a dude, so I always try and put myself. And I've done some of the training where I'm not getting hit back. All the training I did was awesome, but it got to a point where I I wasn't getting hit back. I was like, I wonder what that feels like. And there was a couple times there in the gym that I was working out in LA where I'd just get slammed on the floor or I'd take a punch or something like that. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's like a small little fraction of what these guys endure. So I had to ask, man, there had to be some sort of fear or anxiety, at least as you put it.
Yeah, no, it's there. Absolutely there. And that's the motivation, the gas on the fire, if you will, to do the work,
right.
Be as diligent and as prepared and as big a student of the game as you can be. Study, look at tape, nutrition, sports psychology, physical fitness, all those things all roll up into that athlete that walks those 4 steps up into that cage.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they talk about you as a fighter, they talk about no one will out-prepare you as a fighter leading into a fight. And the one thing, and this is something when you watch, they have those small clips of, that they document someone's training camp, they're 3 months or so of getting ready for whatever it is, 3 to however long it is.
12 weeks is pretty standard, yeah.
Right,
10,
okay.
12.
Yeah, and even that too, I'm thinking of this, and this is something I want to ask you. You have no idea that you don't have spies or anything in their camps. You really have no idea how they're preparing, what they're doing to prepare for this fight. Do you ever feel like, was there ever that, that thought of not feeling prepared going into a fight for you, or not quite sure about what you're going to see, something, even in the first round, something taking you by surprise?
Yeah, I think that happens certainly, and the beauty, and certainly that you talked about that first night, those first fights. I fought twice that first night. I had never seen either one of those guys before. I had never got to watch any footage or videotape of their previous fights. It just didn't exist. It wasn't there. But I came from that Olympic wrestling background where we scouted a lot. We did a lot, took a lot of notes, watched a lot of video, both collegiate and Olympic wrestling. That was something we did on a regular basis. So as soon as there was footage available, I was watching that. I wanted to see his oldest fight to his newest fight. How has he progressed? Where did he win? Where did he lose? Where did he like to be? Where did he seem not to like to be? All those things. And then having a team of coaches to help me sharpen the appropriate tools.
Yeah.
Not blow sunshine up my hind end.
Right.
Oh, don't worry about it. You got this guy. Be realistic about how my style and my strengths and weaknesses match up with his. And then come out with the best ways to put him in the worst place he can be. Yeah. And the best place for me to win that fight. There is no guarantee. When you get it right, it's an amazing thing.
Right.
And when you screw it up, it's a rough night.
Yeah.
You're probably getting stitches, and there are other things going on. So at the end of the day, the people that matter are still there that next day. They don't care whether you won or lost. Yeah. And that should free you up to go out and put it on the line and do exactly what you trained to do. That's the delicate balance of the whole thing, and especially in a precarious individual combative sport like fighting.
Right. Did you ever have a situation? I know you had, you're in Oregon. You had a gym, a really good crew of people in your early days UFC, and they're probably stuck around, throughout your career. What was the toughest element or style of fighting that you really had to sharpen? That you felt like, obviously at your level, you're going to have a pretty good grasp over everything. But was there ever that element you're like, man, I need to avoid this for this fight because I just don't feel like this is as good as these other things?
Well, I think the thing for me was facing another wrestler. Was a tough fight, because that was the background that I relied on heavily to put me in those positions to win.
Yeah.
Training with Matt Lindland and Dan Henderson, both Olympians, Chael Sonnen, we had a slew of very, very good, Jeff Munson, Benji Raddick, Chris Lieben, Ed Herman, all guys with good wrestling background, solid, and some of them, obviously the top of the heap was Dan and Matt. They were both Olympians. Yeah. So anytime you were training with those guys, you couldn't get away with some of the stuff from my wrestling background that worked. When I fought Handelman, national champ, Borough State, great wrestler, took me down first and second round. I spent the rounds on my back. Thank God I had done that diligence and spent time there in practice, learning jiu-jitsu, learning how to use my legs, learning how to protect myself and stay out of trouble. And then in the third round, I took him down. And boy, he had not spent any time there. He
Yeah.
basically did the dying cockroach. The legs and the arms went straight up in the air, and I was found my way to a position where he wasn't going to get out. He was done. So, and he was an amazing athlete, an amazing guy. But that was the difference in that match. Early on, he won the first 2 rounds clearly.
Right.
He out-wrestled. And so I felt like anytime I was matched up against another wrestler, it was going to be a tougher night. I have to get creative and find ways to get where I needed to be.
And I want to ask you this too. I was watching a clip. Brock Lessner, that's a big fight. You've got an after party after that. The UFC, it's a glamorous sport at this stage. There's going to be, after the celebrities at the after party, the whole thing. You get knocked out, you get pounded on the ground. When you watch the footage, it's pretty brutal. What happens the moments after that fight? What happens after you get hit like that and knocked out?
Yeah, well, I mean, protocol is for anytime you get knocked out. And in that particular wasn't a complete knockout. I mean, he hit me hard and knocked me down, but I didn't go out. I mean, the only time I really got knocked out was the second Chuck Liddell fight. He drilled me, and I lost that little piece of time. I was second. The next second, I have a bunch of people looking at me, and I'm like, what the hell happened? I had no idea what happened. In the Lesnar fight, he caught me right behind the ear with a right hand. I went down. As soon as my butt hit the canvas, I was awake. I just couldn't get out from underneath that big bitch. So, he hammer-fisted me until the referee stopped the fight. And protocol is to go right away and get a CT scan. Make sure you don't have a bleed or something else going on, which we've seen. Obviously, a lot more prevalent in boxing than it is in MMA. But I was disappointed. All I had wanted him and was on my way to being successful in that fight. And he just caught me with a good one. He's a lot longer than you realize he is. He looks so big and thick that you don't realize he's got the reach he has. So, but that, again, the Chuck Liddell fight was a lot worse knockout. That was a real bona fide knockout and he flashed me in the third fight. Chuck did. But again, as soon as I touched the ground with my butt, I was right back awake. I wasn't out unconscious. Calm.
Right. Gotcha. So so after so you go to the hospital, then there's still an after party set up, I'm sure.
I got up, buddy. I was definitely ready for a barley pop.
Yeah. So you're not in a situation where you just want to sit in a room, stay away from people. You're like, you know what? Hey, look, I worked my ass off for this. I'm still going to go out and be around my friends. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Absolutely. Because my friends and my family are all there. First of all, they want to know I'm okay. So going back to the after party was important for everybody's peace of mind. Yeah. And I know those folks are going to be there whether I won or lost. Or they would have been a lot happier had I won, but I was still there and I was still fine, talking coherent. Everything was good. So certainly my mom is a lot more at ease. Everybody else is fine. And those are the people that matter.
Yeah. And I think too, and this is something that, the extreme highs and lows of an, MMA career at your level, right? You have this build up. You mentioned the 12 weeks leading in, then the complete adrenaline rush. The weeks after that, do you ever, get in these places where you feel like you need that right away? You need some sort of, adrenaline or anything right away?
There's almost a letdown, a state of depression, if you will. Whether you lost too, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's a little darker if you lost because you lost your mistakes and where you went wrong. But you win. Letdown, like you're somehow not there anymore. You've been so mentally involved in this process to get night, and then it's over. And it's like, now what?
Yeah.
Weird thing. But, you definitely right back in the gym, right back to training. You got partners that helped you get ready that are probably getting ready for fights. So you get right back in with them and be a good partner and a good training advisor for them going into their next fight. And then you're learning new stuff. It keeps you on the straight and narrow.
Right, and to that point too, you mentioned other guys in the gym, younger fighters. Probably there's been a slew of guys you have mentored. Fighters who've gone in the UFC level or a lower level. So it must be. I mean, I can't imagine how competitive, especially once the UFC just went through the roof. I know in Australia it's so popular back there. Everyone feels like they can be. Everyone feels like they can be a UFC fighter or MMA fighter because they hit a couple pads or whatever. What do you think? What do you think the biggest separator was for you as a fighter to be the level you're at?
I think ultimately you see tons of people that are talented. Honestly, wasn't the most physically gifted. I made up for that with work ethic. You have to have the total package. At some point, you're going to break into that top percentage of people. They're all physically talented. Now, how are you going to distinguish yourself from all those other guys that have set the same exact goal that you have? And that's where the work ethic and being a student of the sport and having an open mind, being coachable, taking care of yourself, not just in the gym, but rest time and your other times when you're not in the gym are just as important. So I think finding that whole package is a rare thing. And that's the difference between guys like you that made it to the big leagues and the guys that didn't. There were plenty of other guys that were as talented or maybe more talented than you, but you were able to make it there. I think that's the thing that distinguishes us. Yeah. That we were willing to be diligent, to put our butts on the line, risk failing. Some guys, it's too big an ego and it's not in them to risk failing. They can't put themselves out there. I mean, that's a psychological thing, but it lends itself to the physical performance.
Yeah, you make a good point. And with baseball, I've seen so many guys, AA, AAA, who are just studs, throwing 100 miles an hour, nasty changeup, whatever. How the hell did that guy never sniff the big leagues? But I think you made a good point is the failing aspect. Some guys, they get hit around. You get to the big leagues, you get hit around, you get hit hard. And you have to be able to say, hey, I'm good. That's one thing, obviously, I struggled with. Did you have... when, whether it's in your gym or throughout your career, was there ever, young fighters like, man, this kid's going to be an absolute stud, but just never quite got over the line?
I saw guys that I trained with that were absolute terrors on the practice mat. And then when it came to fight night, they had a little trouble unleashing that same fury and that same technique and tactic and conditioning that I knew they had. And what was the disconnect? The disconnect was right here. Right. You have to recognize that you control that subconscious voice, that internal dialogue is something that you control. And so many of us are subject to that. We fall to that. We let that voice go on and on and on and undermine our confidence. And especially when the pressure's on, when the battle is coming or the competition is coming or it turns up, that little voice inside our head can say all kinds of crazy things. And if we don't figure out who controls who, we've got a serious problem. Yeah. And it's going to get in the way of unleashing that physical and talent, that ability.
Do you take that into now that you're acting, right? And you're starting to get these roles and obviously you're done competing, fighting. Do you take that same mentality, especially the that voice inside your head, that subconscious, do you take that into acting as well?
Absolutely. In everything, you got to go ask for a raise. You get into an argument with your wife. I mean, if you let that subconscious dialogue control you, it'll say all kinds of stuff, and then you'll end up in fights in places you never wanted to be. So learning that you control it, giving it the positive, affirmative things to say, absolutely carries over into every other part of my life. And I'll be honest, I wish I'd have figured it out earlier, figured it out sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have been divorced 3 damn times. But, I might have figured some of that out and been able to communicate better and learn and maybe been tougher earlier, maybe had more success on the mat or other places earlier on.
Right. This is one thing I struggle with, watching myself pitch, watching footage of myself. I just can't watch it. Or I can't even hearing my voice sometimes, with broadcasting or, doing this. Did you ever have issues watching yourself, footage of yourself, or you were totally fine with that?
Yeah, I never liked it.
Right. Why is that?
I don't know. I think we're our own worst critics sometimes. Yeah. I think nobody is harder on us than we are on ourselves a lot. And so I don't know. Same thing with acting. When it's finally all done and I get to go to premiere, and that's a big to do, and you get to sit down, but I still find myself critiquing myself and, man, I could have done that better. I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes, and we have to learn to kind of sort that out and come to terms with that.
So you're not sitting there in that premiere of The Expendables covering your face like this because you got.
It wasn't quite that bad, but internally, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely critiquing myself. And
for sure.
Same thing is true in athletics. Watching fights, and I never really watched the ones I won because I got the outcome that I wanted.
Right.
And then I'm sure there were still things to learn and still mistakes that were made, but I never really watched the ones I won. The ones I lost, now those are the ones I studied. Those were the ones I watched the most.
Yeah.
That's where I needed to make adjustments. That's
right.
And again, that comes into, our whole motto at the gym is check your ego at the door. It's only going to get in the way. So leaving that ego outside, watch those and figure out what you could have done, where your mistake was. And sometimes it's simply as, man, I got caught. I didn't do anything wrong, really. I just got caught, and that can happen.
Well, that's got to be the most frustrating thing in your sport. It's just that one, that one punch to the head where you get caught like that. That's it. 3 months, whatever the preparation is for that huge fight, and that's it. Do you ever look back? Speaking of watching yourself, Chuck Liddell, you beat him the first time, and then he beat you twice after. For example, Chuck Liddell, that's a big profile fight. You ever look back and say, "Oh man, I wish, I could have." Obviously not done this or done that differently, but had a chance to fight him again? Or does that still play on your mind, or is it water under a bridge now?
It's water under the bridge now for me. I feel like I came to terms with those losses back then, and those losses were very important to me. I wouldn't change them because at the end of the day, they made me a better person. I faced that adversity. I came back and fought again and was successful and won again after those disappointments. And that in my mind is the true essence of being a champion. It's not about winning all the time. Yeah. It's about how you pick your ass up and get back and figure out how to win again.
I forgot to mention this story earlier. You and I got a chance. We went out, had dinner. We hung out one night in LA, and every dude from 25 to 45 years old wanted to come have a selfie, right? And it was so funny because I remember this. You probably don't remember, but there was a LA Lakers player who had a bit of a bad boy sort of, image to him. Yeah, whatever, right? That was his identity. So you have all these dudes coming up, and they're all trying to, they're giving the fist, and they're all trying to kind of look tough in the photo, stick the chest out because they're standing with you, right? And yet you're so gracious with everyone. You're always, hey, how you doing? Like super friendly. We go down the elevator to the parking lot. And there's this huge dude. I'm not going to mention any names, but big dude, NBA player. And he's I don't know who it was, maybe his agent or something. Goes, oh, hey, Randy, this is, so-and-so. And this dude was trying to do the whole tough guy act. And you're like, hey, buddy, how you doing? Look at that watch. That thing's huge. It was so funny because he was he was anticipating this, like he felt like he had to, stick his chest out around you because, you're Randy Couture. You know what I'm saying? Do you ever have any situations, I don't know if this happens all the time or it never happens, where people in public try and challenge you? They've had a few beers and they try and...
I'll get the offhanded comment. Usually it's, oh, man, you don't look that big. I thought you'd be bigger. It's usually that sort of thing. And I'll wisecrack back. Change your perspective. I'm sitting on your chest looking down at you. and I'll laugh. And they're not even sure what I said. And I got nothing to prove. I've never really had anybody seriously push it and try to create a situation. Usually it's off, with a quip or a comment, and we're laughing and having a good time. It's all good.
Has there ever been that that instinct to just be like, dude, I'm going to flatten you right now, even after a comment, or any of your buddies who are at that level? Have they ever been in a situation where like, dude, I'm going to lay you out right now?
Not for me.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some of my peers that have been in that situation, but I have never been in that situation. I'm generally smiling and I can speak if I need to speak and can kind of talk my way out of things. Nothing's worth, there's no winners in those situations. That's the truth.
Yeah.
There's no winners in those situations.
Is that something as a UFC fighter that you have to sign off to say that you cannot do anything in public or any of those kind of, or it's not even a thing? You just know it's just an unwritten rule. You just don't.
Yeah, it's just a given. I mean, same with you or any other professional ball player. I mean, there's a certain code, a certain demeanor. You're not just representing yourself. You're representing that team, your folks, everything. Yeah. And so I think most of us want to do that in a very positive way. And, there's an occasional guy that doesn't feel that way and gets into trouble. I mean, you take a look at what John Jones has done, in his career. And he's an amazing fighter. And it's really unfortunate that he can't keep straight outside of the cage. And, he's going into looking at probably a ban and another stripping of the title. And it's just a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah. Well, Randy, this has been fun, mate. I appreciate your time. I know you're not busy at the moment with this shutdown. You're stuck inside.
I'm on quarantine, just like you.
Exactly. Well, this is not how I envisioned this through Skype. I actually envisioned this 2 chairs set up, the whole film crew in the middle of that octagon at Extreme Couture. Shut the whole gym down so you can teach me some grappling. But maybe next time I'd love to get down there and you can show me a thing or two, because I got no idea what I'm doing, especially on the ground. That's for sure.
Well, it's great to see you again, and a pleasure talking with you. And I'm glad you're doing well. You're I think still one of the only baseball players that we've gotten to work with. We've worked with a ton of football players, a few hockey players now, some lacrosse players, but I still think you're the only baseball player that we've worked with. So
I was addicted. I got to say, it got to a point where I was months away from spring training, and I had to start to make that transition to throw and get in baseball shape. I didn't want to leave. I loved it. It was so much fun, in the gym. But again, I wasn't getting hit back. That's the difference, I think. So anyway, but Randy, hey mate, this has been fun. I appreciate your time, and all the best just dealing with this shutdown, and hopefully we can stay healthy and get back outside.
Absolutely, man. Thanks. All the best to you too.
Appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Top Step. Now make sure you click that subscribe button down below, or visit www.thetopstep.com so you don't miss any future episodes. Now coming up, I get a chance to sit down with comedian and actor, huge Mariners fan, Mr. Adam Ray, as well as super prospect of the Seattle Mariners and one of MLB's future superstars, Justin Dunn. I'll catch you on The Top Step very soon.